Good morning, everyone. Morning.
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 Welcome to IEA Pre-Budget Forum, Corporate Sector. We will start in the next 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Yes. Okay. Good morning, everyone. My name is Kwame Owino, and I work at the Institute of Economic Affairs. And I welcome you to the first webinar hosted by the Institute of Economic Affairs for the year 2021. Now, as your invitation stated, every year at around this time, the Institute of Economic Affairs hosts public forums to discuss, rather to receive presentations and to use those presentations to prepare a proposal for the Treasury. And the essence of these discussions is basically to get various Kenyan interest groups, corporations, and collectives to prepare proposals that will be presented to the Treasury as part of budget contributions. And so this is the first, this is the first time we're doing it by webinar, but the IEA has done this consistently since 1998. So we welcome you to this meeting. Now, these meetings are usually split into two. So we have today the first day one, which is corporate sector, to receive representations from the private sector. And then tomorrow, at a similar time, we shall receive representations regarding social policy from non-state actors, but also those that come from the private sector, but also more specifically, social sectors such as education, health, agriculture, and a few others. Social protection, health, and housing, and a few others. So as you can tell from our program, we have to start at 9:40, so we just barely on time. We have 4 speakers today, and our 4 speakers, I'll introduce them in turn. Dr. Timothy Njagi, Jeru from the Tegemeo Institute of Agricultural Policy and Development. We also have Mr. Job Wanjohi, who's Head of Policy Research and Advocacy at the Kenya Association of Manufacturers. We'll also have Mr. George Kavulunze, who's the Regional Director for the Global Water Partnership in Eastern Africa. And our last speaker will be Mr. Elias Wahisi, who's a Manager in Public Policy and Research at the Institute of Certified Public Accountants of Kenya. And so each of them will have about 15 minutes to make presentations, and then we'll synthesize those and have a discussion thereafter. So if any of you have questions, you can send it through the chat box or have them ready, and then as soon as they're finished, we'll have an opportunity to ask each and every one of them questions, but also to have a broad discussion before we can close at about 11:30. So once again, welcome for being in the audience today, and I'd just like to advise us about 2 rules. 1, please keep your camera switched off and your mic muted unless you're speaking or you'd like to ask a question. So that's a first. And the second one is try and keep the background noises away so that we do not have any interference from during the presentations. So without further ado, I'd invite Dr. Timothy Jerry. Timothy, please make your presentation, and I hope you download your PowerPoint presentation from that side. So thanks a lot, everyone. And
thank you, Kwame. Again, thanks for making us part of this year's forum. And I'll be presenting. I hope you can all see my screen.
Yes, Tim, I can see your screen. I hope others can see it as well.
Okay. Well, I will be making a presentation that looks at the role that the agriculture sector play in the post-economic recovery, post-pandemic economic recovery period. Basically trying to see whether the positions that have been made in the 2021-2022 budget are consistent with that, and what we can do different to make sure that this is an effective role in the post-recovery period. So, as you all know, I like showing numbers, so I'm going to throw a few numbers at you and then do my discussion. The sector has been facing a number of challenges, and if you can see for the last, if you look at the last 4 years, it's been kind of volatile, mainly because the sector continues to rely heavily on weather. You can see that when we had a drought, we dipped in 2017, we dipped again in 2019, and 2020 is expected to dip further because of the shocks that we had. But despite this fact, the sector continues to be a strong contributor to the overall economic growth, and also the sector kind of has been volatile in terms of contributing to the sources of economic growth. Like this, what I mean by this green line, not the green line, but this yellow line is the ag share in economic growth. Like, so in terms of driving the economic growth, the sector has been volatile mainly because of the sector itself being volatile, and and yeah, we do expect that what we've seen in last year, that the sector can be strengthened because it offers an escape route, especially in economic and food security for many households. When you look at the subsector growth, we see a convergence for the key sectors, that is crops, livestock, fisheries, and forestry. Fisheries has struggled initially after we went to devolution, mainly because of a lack of clarity in who was supposed to do what. But then this has improved over time, and we expect for the opportunities. Livestock and fisheries create a lot of opportunities moving forward, especially for transforming the sector, the way we've been doing things, and also they have a lot of opportunities in livestock and fisheries for linkages to the manufacturing sector and value addition as well. So this growth, that although it's positive, tends to converge in 2019, but then we know that in 2020 we do expect shocks, and we'll be able to see this once the economic survey is released later in the year. But we know that some of the key sectors that were affected, especially because of the value-adding activities, the post-production activities, were livestock and fisheries. So in terms of general observations, the sector has been resilient, especially in 2020. In 2020, the sector suffered multiple shocks. Apart from the COVID pandemic, we had floods earlier on in the year, as well as the desert locust infestation. During the pandemic period, the sector provided opportunities for many people who are coming away from other sectors because of the shrinkage in economic opportunities in those sectors. And the sector was able to absorb this either through primary production, just for meeting own food security needs, as well as providing incomes. And this emphasizes the role the sector can play, especially in alleviating poverty, both in rural and urban sectors, but as well as just reinforcing the overall need that the sector plays, especially in building resilience for livelihoods. But despite this, we see that the long-term challenges still persist. I mean, the key challenge right now, of course, would be the effects of weather and weather variability. We're still facing low productivity, high production costs, and generally, we remain a net food importer. And the worst deal is that our production is not competitive. What I mean here is that, yeah, when you look at most of the imports that are coming to the country, whether it's maize, onions, tomatoes, once these imports come, they're able to displace our local production because they tend to be cheaper. And we've not really figured out a way of fully addressing what makes our production expensive. So the sector is being guided right now by the long-term strategy, which is the ASCGS, Agriculture Sector Growth and Transformation Strategy. But the key thing, the reason I'm pointing this early on here is that the SDGs, as it's currently, is a strategy that is calls for more private sector investments in agriculture. So it means that we need to look beyond what the public sector is providing in the sector to try and to try and crowd in private sector investments. And one of the things that, of course, we pay attention to, especially when we look at the budget proposals, is whether these proposals actually achieve that in terms of do they provide incentives for the private sector to participate in the sector. So when you look at the proposals, in terms of trends, this is data from both the National Treasury and COB, and we've also made projections from the sector reports for the sector. This is the overall share, the lines, which are shown in the right axis, and then the blue bar is the nominal amount shown in the left axis. And we can see we kind of dipped around 2018, but it's like we're starting to improve again in terms of the share. But again, even after we factor in what counties would expect counties to allocate, which is this yellow line above here, we still see that our share in total budget would still be around 3%. So this is way below the commitments, and although I'm not showing this one here, one of the key critics for this graph has always been that we need to look at what other sectors spend in support of agriculture, for example, roads, the health, the nutrition program, and all that. But even when we factor in other sectors' expenditures in agriculture, and we've looked at this in the past, we don't go beyond 5%. The highest we've gone is about 5%. So this still emphasizes that at the public sector, there's still underinvestment in agriculture. But of course, this also means that we need to look at where that money is going and how we are utilizing it. In terms of utilization, last year, of course, as expected, we had a dip in terms of budget utilization. This was mainly affected by funds flow, and right now it's even more severe, especially when you think about county governments this year. Most of them have not been able to do most of their programs, and for the sector, this is critical because we know the majority of the sectors have been devolved. So when counties, although this is showing at the national level, we know that the county level it's even worse, and this the effect of this has a direct effect on farmers and livelihoods, because the direct interaction with counties tends to be critical because of the activities that we expect county governments to perform. So the utilization mainly, I suppose, in 2019-2020 has been mainly because of the pandemic. We don't expect this to improve even for the remaining part of the financial year. And we know that some of this will spill over into 2021, 2022. Then when you look at what has been provided for in the current budget, we are at 70% of the resource requirements. And in the medium term, this threshold is somehow maintained. When you look at an average over the three years, what the sector requires and what is being provided is about 70%. And from the public sector, this is expected to be much lower because apart from this allocation, we know that the actual budget that will be released to the sector will be slightly lower than what has been allocated. So this again just reinforces what we mentioned at the beginning, that the need to crowd in private sector investment tends to be critical, especially when you look at some of the things that the country is pursuing. I just wanted to highlight again financing for the Big Four. We are happy that we are seeing a convergence between the resource requirements. And this year it continues to narrow down and is expected to narrow down over the next 3 years. And this mainly is important because before the SDGs, the Big Four agenda was launched with food and nutrition security as one of the key pillars. And initially, we never saw a move towards financing some of the key programs in the Big Four. But right now, as part of the funding requirement, is that you have to show how you are aligned to the Big Four. The Big Four is supposed to end in 2022, and we expect that moving forward, we will now be fully aligned to implementing the SDGs, and we can actually track and follow how the SDGs is being implemented. I seem to have lost my. I don't know whether you can still see my screen. I seem to have lost it, but yeah. So if I can speak to some of the key gaps, especially in the public sector financing, as I mentioned, when you look at the current provisions, there's still a lot of.
See your screen.
Can you see my screen?
No, we can't see it.
Let me share it again. Sorry. I hope you can see it now.
Yes.
Okay. So some of the key gaps, as I mentioned, the incentives of the private sector. If you look at the provisions for most programs in the government, there is, we don't see a lot of incentives that have been put in place for private sector investments to attract private sector investments. It's still more of a business as usual approach, and given that we expect the effects of the pandemic to persist in 2021, we thought that this year would have been a good year, especially to support some of the initiatives and innovations by the private sector. Last year, we saw a lot of use of digital marketing, especially for agricultural commodities. And this has purely been private sector driven. We've seen a lot of coming up of urban and peri-urban agriculture. Again, this is something that we'd have expected the government to pay more attention to, especially in the short term, given that we know that household incomes are likely to remain depressed, and attaining food security would be key. So if this is supported, it's some measures that can actually help households attain this. We would have also expected to see a lot of opportunities for capacity building, especially because this goes hand in hand with getting farmers to learn about new technologies and how they can adapt them to not only increase productivity, but also try to reduce their cost of production, which would actually make them more competitive. We are still seeing that, the fight between the national and county still there, especially when you look at the programs that the national government is implementing that tend to touch on the mandate of county governments. Somehow this continues to persist. And the other thing that is a key gap is the cross-sector linkages. Even as the Big Four mentioned, the issue about agro-processing, adding value up the value chain. But this remains weak. and for most of the commodities, right now we are talking about key programs and industries, including leather, which are not doing very well. And if the current business as usual scenario is maintained, we are likely to completely lose these sectors because of competition, especially from imports. So basically, what would have expected to see there is that we need to look at the trade policies and how we can support effective value addition. What do we need to provide to the private sector for them to do that? The current move by counties, again, to try and do the value addition themselves, we know that in the long run it's not going to be sustainable, because the model where the government engages is business. Economic literature clearly shows that this will not work. In the long run, they'll all fail. So we need to see how we can strengthen farm associations and other private sector investments to take up value addition and help see what incentives need to be put in place for them to be competitive. The other key threats for attaining some of the key objectives that are in the sector, of course, last year you've seen a lot of policy incoherence. And it's not just like the minimum tax. I think for the sector, one of the key things we faced as key threats, of course, has been the excise duties and the levies that are being charged for either output or inputs that are coming to the sector. And one of the things that, an example, if I can use that, last year, even when we were struggling with the pandemic, for example, the National Treasury had sought to increase the excise duty on, like products made that rely on agricultural products as primary raw material. You could think of sorghum beer, which they think the initial proposal was to increase it by 20%. And immediately this happens, the first thing that happens is that EABL would send a notice to farmers telling them that they cannot honor their contracts because now they'll be producing less. And then farmers are still left stuck with the crop because now they cannot find a market, because primarily they were producing for that particular market. So because of this, I mean, we see that we don't have a predictable policy environment, because this keeps changing, and there's need for continuous lobbying for them not to put it. And this is a big deterrent to private sector investment. I would believe that right now, if a private sector person wants to go into value addition in the country, some of the routes that they're being asked to use right now is using the SEZs. But in the SEZs, the other challenge we've also seen is that when you try to import some of the raw materials you need, you have to pay some import duties or levies, which again makes your product uncompetitive, especially when you target the destination market where this is going to be sold. Then another key issue that we're also seeing is over-regulation, especially the key strong government hand in markets. And we do acknowledge that the government has to intervene when market is failing. But in this case, we're seeing intervention where the market has not necessarily failed, but a perception is being created that the market is failing. And then we see a lot of government intervention to try and correct that. And the other challenge, of course, is that the way this is being done in methods that have been tried before and did not work. And I can give specific examples, like what is happening in the tea sector, what is happening in the coffee sector. For example, forcing all the tea market, the tea auction has not necessarily failed. It has some imperfections which can be corrected. But then the strong government hand in that auction will not necessarily address those challenges that the tea auction is facing. Similarly, for the coffee auction, I mean, the same thing, the same challenges do persist. We've seen this also. I mean, last week we had the issue with rice farmers, where the government last year managed to go and buy grain from farmers at a higher than market price. And this year, farmers expected the same, and when they couldn't, then they created a perception that the market is not there. Yet we know that we import almost more than 90% of the rice in the country. So we know that the current move by the government is to reform the regulatory institutions, but I think the intervention in market needs to stop. I'm sorry, I've gone a little bit into that point. And then the other key thing is that we still, in terms of policy coordination, the government, we still have a lot of key sectors, the agriculture bill, the agriculture policy, the veterinary policy, the livestock policy, which continue to remain in draft form. And year after year, I think we've been really emphasizing that there is need to prioritize enacting these policies and bills that have remained in draft form for a very long time, because they are really key, especially in enhancing coordination between, not just between the two levels of government, but also between the public and the private sector within the sector. So, in conclusion, for just again to emphasize that we already now have a sector strategy that relies heavily on private sector investments. Unless we use the public sector investments to crowd in the private sector investments, you're not going to achieve. And we still are calling for significant investment in research, extension, irrigation to the roads. This year, again, one of the other things that we would have expected to see is to see how we can innovatively finance farmers. We know that the government is doing a subsidy program, and that this subsidy program has been reformed, so not through the usual way, but now trying to include private sector in the program. But right now, it's still we don't have a full rollout yet. It's still in selected counties for selected value chains. So for the rest of the other farmers, would have expected to see how the government would want to finance those farmers, not necessarily through subsidies, but also trying to see how the private sector, for example, credit markets, could be incentivized to provide affordable credit to those farmers. The issue about utilization of funds within the sector continues to remain a challenge. And this year, and also coming to next year, we still see that being a key issue, especially because of liquidity. We know that in 2020, the key challenge actually was that at both levels of government, the public sector actors were not liquid. They could not get money when they needed it. And given the challenges we see in revenue collection, we know that this is still going to be an issue. So I would like to stop there, and I think I'll apologize. I've gone slightly over the 15 minutes allocated. Thank
you. Okay, thanks a lot, team. So I'll just try and summarize. Well, you took us through, of course, the existing strategy. I think you emphasized the fact that broader success in the strategy that exists will depend on government crowding in more investments from the private sector. I think that's true. I also like the fact that maybe we should have had a separate session. We should have had a separate session to discuss the tea sector, because I think that's true. The tea sector shows something about the policy incoherence in Kenya, where government decides to intervene and to add regulations to a sector that's already working broadly. In the process, I think everybody's unhappy with the outcomes. And it's not clear that the solutions that are proposed will solve these problems. So it tells us how, while agriculture is a broadly practiced economic activity, I think getting the policies right is something this country has been struggling with for long. And it often involves the policy incoherence that you see, interference in the interest of one group or the other against others. And obviously, so here we still are with that. You mentioned the question of rather the effect of competition from imports. And I agree with you that the competition from imports, of course, makes it difficult for domestic production to hold. But I think agriculture policy is one area in which the interest of consumers, I think, should be brought to the table, as well as that of producers, in as much as, of course, many Kenyans are also farmers. So trade policy, I think, is part of the fix, but I don't think trade policy is certainly part of the fix. And you mentioned something about trade policy as well as part of it. But I think one of the things you've convinced us about, or rather you stated very, very clearly, is how agriculture, while it's a big and broad-based industry in Kenya, depends to a large extent on many things happening from, rather, many other successes in both private sector and the public sector, investments, taxation, and everything else being pitched right. What this tells us is obviously the execution of budgets and ensuring public investment goes to the most critical areas, especially because cash is scarce at this moment. Effects of COVID until the end of this year as well. So thanks a lot, team. We'll have an opportunity to have a question and answer. And if you have any questions for team, please save them or send them on the chat box. We'll be able to I think we'll have some time for us to discuss them. And you actually took just about 17 minutes, which is sufficient. Our next presentation, ladies and gentlemen, is from Mr. Job Wanjohi, who is the Head of Policy Research and Advocacy at the Kenya Association of Manufacturers. And he'll be talking about from surviving COVID. The manufacturing sector is one of the big four. And so obviously our day one submissions today try to concentrate on the big four, broadly speaking, but also to see what fiscal and policy measures to support manufacturing sector's resilience and growth. So Job, if you're ready, please go ahead. And ladies and gentlemen, once again, let me just advise that when you join, please keep your cameras off and please stay muted so that the recording can be as clear as possible, but also so you do not distract the presenters. Job, you have 15 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kwame, and everybody, good morning. Let me share the screen so that I can start my presentation. But as this comes up, a few things to note from the manufacturing sector. One of these is that besides the down run, as far as its contribution to the GDP is concerned, for the last 3-4 years, because of various unfavorable conditions, you can see like now the GDP contribution has moved down from about 9.2% in 2017-2018 to where we are currently at 7.7%, and it's likely even to worsen. But this is because there's some other sectors that are performing better than the manufacturing sector, and our ambition is to get to the 15% GDP contribution. So we are working very hard as manufacturers to see that this happens, and we are moving at the same pace as other sectors. One sharp contrast you see is the allocation of the manufacturing sector from the budgetary allocation by the National Treasury, which amounts to less than 1% of the GDP, and you see that again on the revenue contribution by the same sector stands at more than 25%. So you see there is inverse relationship between the sector budgetary allocation by the National Treasury and the revenue generated by the sector. That means if we can have a direct relation instead of the inverse relation, with more money being pumped into the sector, talk of a better policy environment, probably you can see a rebound of the sector, besides even when you're talking about the COVID-19 at the moment. So the other thing is looking at competitiveness, various issues that need to be looked into when talking about a level playing field between what is imported and what is locally manufactured. The competitiveness from the cost factor. When you're talking about the market access, local, regional, and international, there are various efforts that have been put into this, but you find they have not translated into actual sales locally, regionally, and internationally. Policy stability. We have seen Dr. Timothy talking about the policy disruption that happens every day from the government. Today, you're talking about this taxation. Tomorrow, it has changed. You're talking of investment deduction allowance. there's some logical investors who came in to the investment deduction allowance was at over 50% and 100%, Nairobi and the rural counties. But now it is 50% across the country. So you find that is disrupting on logical investments that have been done by investors, and you find that now they count a loss on their P&L. What you talk about again, resilient sustainability strategy, especially around COVID-19. It has also come to disrupt the sector very much and also hurting the competitiveness. You find that the importation of the raw materials is attracting a higher cost than it was before. And that's why we have titled the presentation of today, From Surviving COVID-19 to Thriving, the fiscal and policy measures to support manufacturing sector resilience and growth through 2021-2022 national budget proposals. We can go to the next slide. One of the issue that you're looking at and is touching on the competitiveness and level playing field. One of the issues that I talked about competitiveness is the minimum tax. The minimum tax was introduced by the government through the Finance Act 2020. There were slight amendments that were done through the Tax Law Amendment Act number 2 of 2020 that came in December last year. This tax is effective from 1st of January 2021. That means the first installment falls around April 20th. The intention of the government is to reduce, to increase the government revenues in the face of reduced borrowing chances. Look at the GDP to debt ratio starting at 61%, 62%, which is a bit sustainable, of which the standard GDP to debt ratio starts at around 55%. When you're talking about the revenue generation, it's something else that also government is looking at, so that those who have not been contributing towards the exchequer and they're benefiting from the infrastructure development that are happening in the country can at least contribute. But you can see in this, the minimum tax is indiscriminative. It's going to, it's going to be imposed on tax compliant corporations, corporates, talk about businesses, and those who have not been paying any form of tax before. Some of the challenges that come with this, you find that the term gross turnover, because it is pegged on the gross turnover, it's not recognized in any of Kenya legislations. Something else that is of a challenge is the introduction of minimum tax is neither a promise nor a guarantee that the government will achieve all its intended benefits. We have seen increment of taxation before, but this has not translated into stoppage of introduction of new taxation measures. So we need to look at the other side of the coin, and especially now the expenditure part of the budget, and see where there are wastages, where we can probably have a moratorium on development, so that we cannot continue bottlenecking and milking the private sector to a point of death, because there are some sectors and even players that are likely to collapse out of this minimum tax. The other thing is the introduction of minimum tax will lead to increased tax revenue. Already, even if a company is loss-making or a company is a startup, you find from immediately they start paying the pay, the VAT, Railway Development Levy, import declaration fee, service charge in the hotel industry, catering levy also in the hotel industry, corporation tax, excise duty. All this is paid on top of this minimum tax that is being introduced. So the claim that some companies have not been contributing towards the economy I find it false because there's some other taxations, other measures that have been imposed on them, and they have been contributing towards the national growth. Minimum tax will reduce Kenya's attractiveness as a sub-Saharan economic hub. This is from, if you are a startup and you start on a loss making, you start on recouping the capital that has been invested. Your P&L or your balance sheet will not reflect any profits, and subsequently you'll be expected to pay the minimum tax from the onset. So this one will subsequently reduce the attractiveness of Kenya as an investment hub, and most of investors likely to resort to our neighboring countries because of this inconvenience. Another challenge is minimum tax is an additional or double tax on a company's top line, because you find that the turnover, which is the base of our taxing these, you find it the same, that the VAT 16% is charged on. Minimum tax now comes at 1%, is going to be charged on this. So it's an additional and unnecessary double taxation. Low margin sectors, talk of retail sector. If you are, your margins are within like now 4%, and then you have a minimum tax of 1%, you will be forced in one way or the other to increase your margins so that you can be able to take care of the minimum tax at 1%. And subsequently, what is this likely to happen is that the margins that have been increased so that they can remain within the 4% with additional cost will be pushed to the consumers. And what we are likely to see is the cost push inflation in the country, and not necessarily the demand pool inflation. So this will see some effect on the fiscal policies, some effect on the monetary policies, and it's something to look at more seriously, because it has an effect even on the consumers, the final consumers. It is also a final tax. That means there's no room for you to claim refunds from the National Treasury, because there's no mechanism that has been put in place on how, if you've paid the minimum tax today, you can claim it in future calculations when you are claiming your VAT, or you are claiming your refunds from the National Treasury, from Kenya Revenue Authority. So our proposal is to see abolition of minimum tax at 1%, even if this was changed through the Miscellaneous Amendment Act number 2 of 2020, and we have to wait for another 6 months for this to happen. Probably we can see reintroduction of the same to the Parliament for the abolition, and the first installment that falls in April, we will not see calls for payment during that time. Expected outcome is no cost-led inflation in the country, room to negotiate how to increase tax base in the country without inconveniencing cost-wise already tax-compliant companies. The second one is on import declaration fee and railway development levy. We had IDF and RDL reduced for imported industrial inputs, intermediate products, to 1.5%, and the same increased to 3.5% and 2% respectively for finished products. What we have come to see is that because we are tracking the sector's competitiveness, which at the moment stands at around 12.8%, is that the reduction to 1.5% of RDL and RDL for industrial input was not sufficient, and we are calling for the removal of IDF, that is import declaration fee, for all industrial inputs. Those are the basic raw materials and the intermediate inputs. Also industrial machineries and the spare parts, and the railway development levy, because we are still committed to see the infrastructure support coming to the government for infrastructure development. So railway development levy to be retained, or to be reduced, sorry, to 1%. By doing this, what we are looking at is the introduction of these two rates, through enactment of the Finance Act 2019, and this probably can be done through Finance Act 2021. You'll see by addressing the two levies, increased competitiveness. I've talked about the competitiveness index that is starting at 12.8% compared to the rest of the world. We'll see a reduction in it by about 2.5%. The other, let me move the slide, is on prompt payment of refunds. This is a major challenge to the manufacturing sector. You find more or less the refunds that are accruing to the for the private sector, or they're supposed to be paid by the government back to the private sector. Sometimes they are lagging too much, and we feel like the government is treating that as revenue on their side, whereas this should be reimbursed immediately. By delay, you find that there are losses, cost-related losses, time accruing to the private sector, and our interest is to see how these can be addressed through establishment of a tax refund fund, and this is through amendment of Public Finance Management Act, Section 24A to be introduced into it, that should read that there shall be paid into the fund 1% of monthly tax collected from any tax law, including the Tax Procedure Act, Income Tax Act, Excess Duty Act, Value Added Act, Tax, and Miscellaneous Fees and Levies Act. This is likely to improve the cash flow of the sector and also reduce the cost of doing business. One thing you'll notice is when the refunds are not processed immediately, manufacturers resort to overdraft from the banks, and subsequently these overdrafts comes with an interest cost. Subsequently you find it's hurting the cost of doing business for the manufacturing, and our interest is to see how we can increase, or we can reduce further this cost of doing business. Another proposal is around increased budget allocation for VAT and excise tax refund. This is related with the previous proposal, whereby the previous proposal we are calling over 1% of the monthly collections, revenue collections, should be channeled to the tax refund fund. You'll find that the average of monthly of the refunds that are supposed to be paid back to the private sector are between 5 and 5.5 billion Kenya shillings, which is equivalent to the 1% that we are talking about. Our interest is to see how this the current allocation for refund, which is currently starting at 1.7 billion per month, can be increased to 5.5 billion per month, and by doing this, to have one lump sum payment to all outstanding VAT and excise tax refund. So this is a discussion we can further have with KRA and National Treasury to see how these allocations can be increased so that we don't hurt the competitiveness of the manufacturing sector. The other proposal is around a refund offset of VAT credit arising out of the old VAT refund formula. This is something to do with a formula that was reviewed, but before it was reviewed, there was an accruing of VAT refunds out of this VAT refund formula. So nothing has been done, and we are calling for amendment of VAT Regulation 2017 and VAT Act 2013, so that these can recognize refund offset of tax arising from the VAT formula. And the expected outcome is we'll see further investments, we'll see export drive by the manufacturing sector, reduction on the cost of doing business, reduction on the cost of money because of the overdrafting that is happening from the sector. The other proposal is around Income Tax Act, Section 24(3)(e) of the second schedule of the Income Tax Act, talking about the definition of the word manufacture. This is a discussion around the power production, electricity power production by the manufacturing sector, of which is part of our manufacturing. You see that in the definition, the private transformation and distribution is not recognized. They are only recognizing supplying to the national grid, and this is what can benefit fiscally from the national treasury. So what we are looking at is the changing of the definition in the Income Tax Act, so that we are not only concentrating on the national grid in the manufacturing, but we are also looking at those who are doing independent wheeling of power, distribution of power through the provisions of the Energy Act 2019 on the net metering, whereby now one can produce one megawatt of power, and you can distribute within the locality. I've seen various one or two circulars in the print media calling for views around these net metering, and you find that such people who are manufacturing power will not benefit if the definition of the word manufacture in ITA or Income Tax Act is not amended. Second schedule of Income Tax Act, paragraph 24(3)(d) on investment deduction allowance. You see that it's only allowable to warehouses or manufacturing hubs that are being constructed, but those that have been bought off from other players, they are not supposed to benefit from investment deduction allowance. So if you find it's an expenditure when you are settling in a warehouse which is already constructed, you find on the balance sheet on that P&L is an expense. So you find that such players who are buying off old warehouses or manufacturing hubs are not benefiting in this. So we are calling for amendment by deleting subparagraph 2 and inserting thereon, the person who purchases the building shall be deemed to have incurred capital expenditure on the construction thereof, equal to the lesser of the price paid for the property and the current market valuation. Income Tax Act, this is about a Ribbit program for placement of graduates from universities and from the TVETs within the manufacturing hubs. The 50% is only allowable if you have more than 10 graduates participating in an internship program within the company. And you find that this is overstretching, the manufacturing sector, and especially the SMEs at a time like this, that jobs are hard to come by, opportunities are hard to come by. So for a win-win situation between the government and the attachee and also the private sector, we're looking at how we can reduce the condition of having more than 10 graduates to at least 3 who are placed, so that one can benefit from this tax rebate program from the government, or the company can benefit from this tax rebate program. VAT on government funded projects. You see that there is what is called exemption scheme for government funded projects, and this exemption scheme you find it's benefiting local supplies and also the imported goods. Under exemption status, one cannot be able to claim back the VAT refund. So you find that local manufacturers who have an input tax are not willing to participate in these government-funded projects, because it is a tax cost on them, because they will not be able to claim back their input tax. So the call for this is to see how they can be put at a zero-rated status and zero-rated VAT status, and it is at these they can be able to get the difference between the input tax and output tax, and subsequently it's not going to be a cost on them. But an exemption scheme for imported finished goods still can remain, so that there's a differential between what is differential between local manufacturing and importation of finished products through in government-funded projects, and this is going to incentivize the local manufacturers to participate in government projects more and more. That marks the end of my presentation. Back to you, Kwame.
Okay, thanks a lot, Job. Thanks for presenting concisely and with the clear backgrounds for everything else. Let me just try and mention two things that occurred to me. I think one of them is that Kenya does not seem to have a manufacturing policy outside how you raise tax. Well, there is SEZs and everything else. But I think the biggest bottlenecks are questions on one tax here, one tax there. So obviously, as you showed, the turnover tax, for all the arguments that have been made in, and obviously we understand that the delays here and there, but for whatever has been made, whatever arguments have been made in defense of it, simply complicates Kenya's tax structure in a way that I don't think that is what was contemplated. If the function is to actually just increase revenue and raising efficiency of corporations, then it seems definitely that it's not just that people are opposed to paying taxes. I think it's very badly. Presentation. Okay, what Job presentation has shown is that whether it's VAT, the balances, is how poorly Kenya's investments have been in water and sanitation generally. In illustrate, the sanitation became a premium because of Mr. George regional co. George, welcome, and you have 10 minutes.
Much, Kwame. I can save on some time. Mostly on the current context of the current context in which we are facing the COVID-19 pandemic. Last year, we had shared a bit also on budgetary allocation to the water and sanitation sector, in particular to the wash sector, which is always neglected. And to date, according to the recent JMP by World Health Organization and UNICEF, it was found that only 59% of Kenyans have access to basic water services and only 29% have access to sanitary services. So this is a semblance of the kind of attention that is given to the wash sector, and it really portrays a picture that is not so pretty at all. So let me begin with the current context, the pandemic, because life will never be the same again after this. Currently, when you look at the approach from which the government is carrying out COVID-related interventions, you find that most of the activities are taking place at national level, and what cascades down to the county level is basically more or less uncoordinated. It is just at the impetus of whoever is in charge of the county. When you look at the key activities, we have the emergency response project, which of course has the fund itself. And this fund is mostly supported on a voluntary nature. And with this, and most of what the donors are supporting, the bulk is going towards medical services and related services like importing the kit for the medical staff, protective gear, mass testing, which also to some extent is highly relieved from the government burden by private testing. So we are looking at a situation where mostly skewed towards certain what we call the key anchors in the process, as opposed to the kind of actions, the proactive actions that are needed. Secondly, it's targeted towards most of the intervention activities are also going towards communication and preparedness. You've seen the government giving briefings on a daily basis, and then the messages around hand washing, behavior change, social distancing, and the safe use of water. And this is just beefing up the kind of messages that have been coming previously in the wash sector about hand washing, especially in schools. So currently, I think the government is making us more aware of that. So another thing that has been done is there are water buzzers going round in some of the disadvantaged communities supplying water. And then, of course, at another level, we have the law enforcement side of it, the nationwide curfew, and the tax relief to low-income earners, and some of the financial relief related interventions were actually brought to an end at the beginning of this year. So there's quite a burden now coming back financially to the common man. So this leads us to ask ourselves some of the key questions. During this intervention, how was it done? What's the methodology and approach? What has emerged? And I titled my presentation that we are still, to portray as if we are still in the COVID era, because we are hearing of a second wave. But now the situation is not really, we are not out of the woods yet. So the methodology and approach it's very evident that it was mostly done in silos. The Ministry of Education doesn't know what the Ministry of Health is planning. The Ministry of Internal Security does not understand the various measures that have been put in place. So this also contributed to the skewed budgets, because we found a lot of money going for medical supplies, and yet at the same time, the citizens are asked to change their way of life, to carry some of the burden, while most of the funding went to purchase, what we call in the layman's term, the hardware, which some of it has not been utilized to date. So in terms of arrangements and implementation schedules, they have been irregular. WASH is supposed to be a lifestyle, but we find that they and all localized authorities has regular, because we've not been able to really have a work plan that is clear and a clear way forward on the work plan. So we keep implementing the measures according to the kind of result we're getting from the previous currently, and we're in the wash the emergencies, and also now currently of coordination and county level, we've got a lot of gaps in this. It's been mostly weak and inefficient. County has reacted. It's the kind of support has gone the underlying issues behind that, even really the system. In terms of policy framework, Kenya has a pretty good it as a right of every Kenyan. And also we have the Kenya Environmental Sanitation and Hygiene Policy 2016 to 2030, which also aims to ensure 100% access to improved sanitation services by 2030. Then we have the Water Act 2016, which has the institutional framework and supporting enabling environmental framework and the management instruments to carry out water resource management in the country and to support the wash services. So, and this is also supported by the Kenya National Water Master Plan 2030. Now, in terms of, I want to go to the next page. Sorry. So this leads us to ask ourselves, which kind of approach should we carry out? And here we propose the WASH IWRM Nexus approach, which is the integrating WASH with water resource management to ensure that we are always on top, always ahead, as we move not only towards the universal coverage, but we're also able to preempt emergencies like the current pandemic. So this Nexus mostly focuses on improved capacity of water sector institutions. And this goes beyond just the usual knowledge and training, the technical knowledge and training. It also goes to enable the various institutional actors to understand why we make some of these interventions, why we have to harvest, store our water, and reuse and recycle it, recharge, so that we are always able to stay on top of the game. Another thing that we need to look at in this emerging scenario is innovative pilot interventions for water security and resilience. And this also in terms of sanitation that is related to water service provision, because we are very advanced in ICT, for instance. We can have smart water management, smart sanitation management systems in place, which actually work, and we can pilot some of these instead of waiting to react to emergencies. And I realized during a recent assignment in Sudan that UNICEF have actually been working with the Sudanese government to recycle plastic and use it as a cover for pit latrines in the refugee camps. And you know, this is not rocket science. Innovation does not have to be rocket science. So we have to think outside the box so that some of the things that we're importing from China become unnecessary, and those expenses are cycled within the country and we grow our own economy. So another aspect of this nexus that we are proposing is improved cross-sectoral engagement and enabling environment. We found that most of the government agencies and other sector actors are working in silos. So we need to create a platform, develop that multi-sectoral working platform between state and non-state actors, and engage the private sector more and more. I think private sector has been the tricky one. Sometimes we don't know how in the civil society, they don't understand how to engage a sector that looks at innovations, that looks at interventions which make business sense. So we have to make a business case for everything and ensure that everyone is on board, and that all the government and other actors are on board. We have to support each other from top down and as well as horizontally. So another aspect that we need to factor in is improved systems and structures in this nexus. And these systems are not only institutional, but also they are to do with the way that we manage our own water and sanitation facilities across various levels. So we need a lot of interactions on this, and we need to bring in the academic and research institutions as well to come and support and also look for the current data. There's a lot of data that we are that is going to waste because we are not sharing it properly, we are not storing it, we are not saving it properly. And then most importantly, and which is also the core of what I'm presenting today, is the budget and financing aspect of it. We need to ensure that all these processes are actually supported and budgeted for. So these are the expected outcomes. I won't mention each one, but you'll see the improved coordination from the nexus approach. Of course, when you look at the capacity issues and the cross-sectoral engagements, you'll find that this will lead to improved coordination among the actors across all the levels of government and also of all the other actors. So, of course, the safe, reliable water sources, strengthened livelihoods and improved WASH and water resource socio-political structure, which is very important. We are looking at lots of lost livelihoods currently due to the pandemic, and we need to bring that back and ensure that we integrate the WASH aspect into the livelihoods so that we don't fall back. We are currently at 29% access sanitation, 59% water. If this pandemic takes us down, then we may take a very long time to recover and we'll never achieve the universal access by 2030. We are now moving into the final decade of that. So all the other issues are capacity related, in terms of water management and also integration of water supply and demand, which is a key support to WASH. And also, of course, increased availability of WASH infrastructure, which we need to look at the kind of infrastructure that we have currently. Some of it is outdated. We need to see how to do that, how to repair what can be repaired and how to replace and upgrade what needs to be improved, and also as well as water quality issues. So the issue of awareness, of course, is very important now that we are looking at a COVID situation, and more so it should be emphasized not only during this period, but also going forward. And then, of course, the technical and innovative capacity. We need to increase that. We need to invest in our technical and innovation. We need to look at the kind of capacity that we have in terms of innovations, because I believe that in this sector, it's one of the most open sectors to innovation. And of course, bring in the research institutions and ensure that we are able to have a hub or various hubs for incubating our technical and innovative capacity. So in terms of our budget proposal, now I won't go so deep into the figures now, because we've walked through that, and I will send a more detailed narrative to our colleagues at IEA, and of course they will share, because in recent years we always have an estimated 29 billion for this sector, and it's never gone above 1.4%, even when we invested heavily on infrastructure for water. Those are the large dams. And you know, if we don't have water, we don't have sanitation. So we've depended mostly on development partners like UNICEF and the World Bank WSP to support these, and of course CEDA and other institutions. So we need to invest more than this, and we are recommending that we take it up to 5% of the total budgetary allocation for this year 2021-2022, excluding the emergency interventions, because if we don't hit the 5% mark, we may fall back on our percentage access in terms of water and sanitation, because it's been projected that in this year we are going to have drought in this region: Kenya, Somalia, and Ethiopia. And of course, with the locust invasion, which has been overtaken now by the COVID situation, that one is going to cause a lot of havoc, and it will do a lot of damage to our water resources. So below there, you'll see the key areas where we would like to spend this money, because we are not asking for it just for the sake of having a budget, because we have to strengthen our water resource management, make sure that we control the perennial flooding, and by extension, the perennial flood drought cycle that we're experiencing. Then strengthen the institutional capacity of not only the state actors, but also the non-state actors, and also take it down local to the communities, and ensure that we invest in more locally led initiatives. I understand that in the previous financial year, the Ministry of Finance allocated they allocated $1 million to locally led initiatives in the climate resilience space. So we need to look at more of this, explore how we can request Parliament to look more at local community initiatives in terms of WASH, especially because most of it is a lifestyle issue, like hand washing, ensuring that you have enough water, and so on. And also by extension, ensure that we have more WASH infrastructure in the hands of the community, of course managed by the government, but with everyone on board. And then of course research, and we need more data, we need to share it, we need to more incubation of ideas and knowledge, and for future use, because like we have learned, the pandemic has caught us off guard, and we've had to innovate as we go along. We need now to get ahead and ensure that we always have the correct data, because actions are informed by data. And then of course school WASH, that is a whole new area, and we have enough development partners for that. But I've always found that budgetary allocation to schools, to the education sector, targets other areas which, in my view, may not be as important as strengthening the school WASH component. As we look at ICT in schools, let us look at how in the education sector we can also factor in adequate funding for WASH. So I'll stop there, and thank you so much for your attention.
Okay, thanks a lot, George. So George is taking us to, I think, illustrated the deficit in public spending on water and sanitation, talking about the fact that first of there's a policy problem in terms of coordinated policy action, where actions in one area do not necessarily cancel those for the others. I think he's also talked about the infrastructure, and I think this is why government investment in infrastructure is essential to be able to distribute that water. That is rarely an area in which private sector investment would be possible, because obviously that kind of infrastructure provision is some form of public good. He's spoken about recommendations on innovation, but I think the more direct recommendation related to spending is that we should spend a proposal for government to spend 1.4% of, to raise total spending on water services from 1.4%, water and sanitation from 1.4% of total spending to 5%, which is almost 3.5 times higher than what it is today. I think that's interesting in the sense that it demonstrates the feeling for those in the sector that there's need for government to push in more money. As we can see, for all the sectors that we've spoken about, we are thinking of pushing more money. I'm not too sure that the public sector infrastructure today could triple money at that level within a year without our hearing 2 years down the line that obviously there were leakages here and there and stuff like that. But nevertheless, I think what George has illustrated is the fact that the gap between the ambition on one side and what the reality is very wide, even if we simply start with infrastructure provision or water services provision within schools, so school wash and all that. You've talked about the fact that there are government development partners that may be able to assist with this. But my view has always been that yes, any service that the government provides would at best be illustrated. The success would best be illustrated by its provision in schools. I think there are almost 40,000 schools in Kenya. 80% or higher are public schools in the sense that they're funded by the public sector. So if we don't have water in public schools, obviously, it will tell you the fact that there's inadequate service provision. But the reason we also place this sector is the fact that water became central to both our response and even prevention of infections with COVID. With SARS coronavirus, and obviously leading to the COVID-19 emergency. So that provision of water has actually made Kenya more vulnerable than we could have been if the investment had proceeded much further. So thanks a lot, George. I'll now open up our conversation to Mr. Elias Wahisi, who's the Manager of Public Policy and Research at the Institute of Certified Public Accountants of Kenya. So Elias, you have 15 minutes from now. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Kwame. Trying to present. Hope all of you can see my presentation.
Yes, we can see it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. And I'll just speak from where my colleagues have left in terms of just building on the conversations we've been having this morning. And my presentation is focused on economic development, enhancing economic development post-COVID. And here we are looking at taxation. Just trying to see most of the time people focus on how to share the cake. Don't really talk about baking the cake, and that's the genesis of my presentation. Just to start us off, as I was reflecting on this, one, I was looking at the import of tax revenue to service delivery. And as you can see that figure that I put in there, we have tax revenue. That's very important in terms of contributing to government expenditure, that then you can only spend once you have resources. And tax revenue becomes a very important plank for us to raise sufficient resources to support government expenditure. And then the government expenditure itself, looking at economic theory, has an important role to play in terms of economic growth. That level of productivity, and the more you grow the economy, of course there are all those debates around economic growth versus development, economic development. Then in layman's perspective, we are talking about service delivery. So there's all that interconnectedness that is there between tax revenue on one side, and then looking at the whole aspect of government revenue, growth, and service delivery. And just trying to look through that, I wanted to bring to the perspective that it's always important to talk about taxation when you're talking about budget making process. And you can see that the way a government achieves or manages its fiscal policy has an important role to play in terms of fueling economic growth. And again, why? Of course, try to looking at the balance of those two, and that brings out the perspectives around spending, public debt, and all the conversations that we had this morning. And still at the background stage, we know, just trying to look at the comparison between budgeted and actual revenue for the past few years. And you can see 2015-2016 estimated was 1.1, and then the actual raise was 1.15. You can see the deviation there, that 1 billion. 2016-2017, again the budgeted 1.3, 1.306, and it goes like that. Of course, when you look at, and I'll be sharing my subsequent slides, 2020-2021 will have a slump or a decline in revenue collection, and this all due to the impact of COVID on households, on corporates, and the entire economy at large. Issues around the containment measures, and how that impacted on productivity of the economy. Still on my introductory bits, again, just looking at OECD in one of the studies, the indication that tax revenues because of COVID could contract more strongly than economic output. And we're already seeing, in fact, here in Kenya, profit warnings by different corporates and different entities. And we all know that corporation income plays, in fact, a bigger role when you compared to other subsets of income tax. So any decline in corporate profits has an impact on the overall tax basket. Then a reduction in economic activity will reduce tax bases. Generally, that's what we're discussing. And then definitely during this particular period, we've had issues around declining international trade because of restrictions, domestic consumption, and all that will have an impact on where we're going. So how can government sustain tax revenue? And just looking at Kenya, one, and this is a proposal that we've been giving as ISPAC, is building a more effective tax system. And here I'll talk about in my next slide about iTax, about even the whole tax administration element to ensure that you have all people in the tax bracket, that increasing the tax base, narrowing the deficit. And here we're talking about the trust deficit. We're talking about citizens having a belief that whatever they are giving is compensated with the services they are getting. So there's need to prove that the hard-earned resources are being used wisely. So whenever you see big headlines about billions lost, then that really has a problem, and it impacts on trust, and it impacts on even that morale to pay tax. The predictability of tax regime, I'll speak to that as one of the proposals. Building Kenya, buying Kenya, and I think the COVID process the COVID pandemic has shown us that we can really rely on Kenya, we can rely on our products here. And this is something that we need to push on, so that when you build local manufacturing and consumption of local goods, that has an impact on even increasing employment and all those kind of things. Of course, talking about increasing impact of global warming and climate change, and better priority setting. And finally, still on my introduction, again, some of the proposals we've been giving as ISPAC is how can National Treasury and KRA support growth through taxation? One, we've been saying that you've noted that with COVID, a lot of online transactions, we had an increase in online transactions, even meetings, we had to go virtual and all that. And that has an impact in terms of base erosion and profit shifting. So how can we then stem in even those multinational transactions? Of course, we're talking about digital service tax and other mechanisms that have been put in place that can help in terms of dealing with base erosion and profit shifting. Tax progressivity, we're talking about dealing with the problem of inequality, which has been exacerbated by even the crisis, so that those who are poor, you become poorer because of the problem, because you are hard hit, and the gap continues to increase. So we need to really address those kind of things. I spoke about building trust through tax facilitation, making it easier to pay taxes, enhance the tax system to enable all taxpayers really be able to comply. Of course, we've been talking about Huduma number, and when you look at it away from the political discussions, you are looking at having a single identifier. And the single identifier for us as ISPAC is we're looking at when you have a single identifier, you'll be able to get all these people who are not in the tax net because we'll be able to then, whatever you are doing, any business, any transaction you're making, through the single identifier, I think we are able to, the government is able to monitor on all the business activities and individual economic activities happening in the economy. So the push for single identifier is very important, and of course leveraging on big data analytics really to help in that. Of course, continuous tax engagement. So before I go to now very individual targeted proposals from the institute, still looking at tax, I was able to just have a glimpse of the draft budget policy statement, and my interest went to revenue. And when you look at revenue again, what I was speaking to, the decline by 2020 declined by 14%, whereas in 2019 there was a growth of 17.1%. Again, you can see the difference in terms of cumulative total revenue for the same period. And then you can see also the tax heads, different tax heads also complying, different tax heads also declining, and that's something that we've been able to pick out from the budget policy statement. So income tax declining by 15.8%, VAT poised to decline by 15.3%, excise duty also declined during the period 0.6%.
Elias, just take a break for a minute. David Ruto, please switch off your microphone. I mean, please switch off your camera. David, please switch off your camera. Elias, please go ahead.
So I can proceed. So I was focusing on this in terms of just for us to look at the environment we're operating in terms of revenue, and really focus this then on the proposals that we're giving in terms of growing this revenue. So one of our major proposals at the Institute, and this we've been seeing for the last, I think since 2017, is the need to really develop an overarching tax policy. And this time around, we are even able to look at the foreign direct investment and the fact that a country's tax policy may negatively or positively influence investment. So a good policy then offers a tax system that's attractive to investment, and especially FDI. When you look at this figure by UNCTAD, you can see how we've been performing. Of course, there are other factors that contribute to growth of foreign direct investment, but our tax policy can play a very important role to really attract investment. So if it's poorly designed, if it has haphazard rules, where you wake up today and you come up with this tax proposal, tomorrow you come up with something else on exemptions, without any policy, then that can have an effect on foreign direct investment. Still on tax policy, why tax policy? One, we're saying, and this we've been saying for quite some time, that our economy has diversified. We've been using, yes?
Could you put back your presentation? We can't see it.
Okay, let me...
Please share your screen once again. Thanks.
So just hold on. Let me share again. So are you able to see it now?
Yes, thank you. Go ahead.
So we were here. I was just introducing the importance of a good tax policy, and in fact, a tax policy on foreign direct investment. And I was saying that in cases where you don't have a policy, there are chances of haphazard implementation of tax rules, or even haphazard generation of tax proposals, and that can have an impact on even investors. And I was saying that why do we need a tax policy? The reason, and we did a study as the Institute with various different actors, including the business membership of organizations, and some of the reasons we gave, one is the Kenyan economy has diversified. Since independence, where we are an agriculture-based economy, we are now talking about the fourth industrial revolution, talking about social media, talking about online transactions and all that. Tax incentives, I mentioned the aspect of we need an objective criterion to determine eligibility for incentives and minimize potential use. Every year, during the budget process, you'll hear a different incentive put in place, but then what is the anchorage for that? especially coming now from the accountants' perspective, in 1999 we adopted IFRS. Every year there are new standards coming up, but then the legislation, because of lack of a tax policy, some of this legislation do not anticipate those kind of changes. Of course, expansion of the tax base, predictable tax environment, and most importantly, harmonization with the constitution. We need a policy that then talks about, embeds the constitution. Minimum tax, the second item that I'll speak to. Of course, my friend Job Wanjohi dwelled so much on this. And just for information participants, the Institute and Kenya Association of Manufacturers have been working closely on this advocacy on minimum tax. So I'll just move to some of the concerns that Job may not have focused on in the presentation. And one of them was that Kenya's minimum tax regime differs with other minimum tax regimes across the globe. In fact, Kenya's minimum tax regime is higher compared to other countries. And that's why, as entities, Kenya Association of Manufacturers, ISPAC, LSK, and other institutions, with technical support from, of course, from IEA as well, have been pushing through this to ensure that we do have a solution for players, for manufacturers, for entities to provide a good working environment. The impact, again, I won't belabor this because Job spoke about this. Increase in tax, of course, it has implications on the Big Four agenda. It's had potential to reduce Kenya's attractiveness as a sub-Saharan economic hub, and then it will lead to capital flight. So there are quite a number of problems with that. The third aspect I wanted to speak to is this is a proposal. With the Finance Bill Act 2020, there was a proposal on taxation of pension withdrawals, and there was removal of exemption of payment of lump sum to senior citizens over the age of 65. And of course, the aspect of pension is becoming a big problem, but we feel there is need to encourage savings to later years, and there's need for us to, as a country, to relook at this and to look at this particular exemption. The fourth, very interestingly, most of our members have been affected by this, and even taxpayers, is the provision by the tax agents, rather, provision under Section 17 of VAT Act, which is providing that VAT is only claimable by a purchaser as input if the supplier declared it in the VAT return. And maybe just to put in a layman's perspective, this is a case where you've purchased an item from a supplier or from an entity. Then the entity is then obliged to keep all the details of that taxpayer for purposes of complying with the law. We feel this is a very administrative element, administrative bit of taxation that can be done by KRA. So pushing it to the taxpayer, pushing to the tax agent as such will really be cumbersome. So this is one of the proposals that we're saying this needs to be deleted. And then very interesting proposal, taxation of rental income. One of the ways of expanding the tax base, we feel reining in on rental income. But again, some of our members have proposed interesting, I can say this is a very interesting proposal, where you allow property owners to write off lost revenue due to COVID-19. So when you give that provision, we feel a lot of people will come out who have not been paying rental income. And in the process, then you'll be able to net them and you bring them into the tax. So it's a way of really increasing the tax base and growing taxation. Then the fifth one is basically, this is looking at, is more not from economic perspective, but looking at the predictability of the tax environment. We are looking at Section 10 of the Excise Tax Act, which empowers the commissioner to adjust the specific rate of excise duty annually. Our proposal then says that we are looking at businesses that most of these businesses do not really factor in annual inflationary adjustments. And our proposal then is, can we amend this to empower the commissioner to adjust the specific excise duty rate for every 3 years? So this gives, so you change from annual to 3-year inflationary adjustment for businesses to just allow for stability and predictability especially for the business environment. So those are the major proposals for ISPAC. I just picked the tax policy, minimum tax discussion, taxation of pension withdrawals, Section 17 of VAT, and taxation of rental income and inflation adjustment. And as I finish, Chair, we need to ponder about these questions in lieu of taxation. One is public debt. When you look at the first column, you can see that total public debt service has been increasing from 2015, 2016 to 2020, 2021. You can see 397, 466, 621, 870, 696, 904. The import of this then is this will have an impact on the resources left for development, resources left even for county allocation. And you can compare that to ordinary revenue and public debt as a percentage of ordinary revenue. So you can see it also been increasing. So this is something that we need to rein in and to be able then to grow the economy. The other question we need to ask is the impact of reversal of tax relief measures. And this was, I think, the previous speaker spoke to this, that the reversal of tax relief measures on disposable income. Remember, they came in for 6 months, but we are assuming that businesses are picked up, which is not the case. So that reversal, both PAYE, you're talking about corporation tax that were introduced, it will have an impact on disposable income, and it may still have negatively affect the growth of taxation. The other aspect we need to talk to is revenue to finance upcoming political events. Yeah, where will you get this revenue? Does this mean we'll need to raise more taxes? Possible referendum. Already you saw IBC then submitting the bill to county assemblies. Already we are now talking about 22 general elections. Preparation should start this year. Again, need for more resources. At the end, I can say there's some light at the end of the tunnel. One, we speak to decline in COVID-19 cases, which eases pressure on the healthcare system, and subsequently the entire sectors that we are now able to move freely, of course, with due care and observing COVID-19 means of health guidelines. However, that decline in itself could be a boost to the economy. Relaxation of containment measures and subsequent opening of the economy, that's also very important because it provides room for a rebound of the economy. And talking about a rebound, again, looking at the draft BPS, growth of the economy is projected to bounce back. You can see from 0.6% in 2020 to from 0.6 to 6.4% in 2021. So there's light at the end of the tunnel, but of course we have to keep asking these questions. This question on debt, this question on reversal, this question on revenue, and of course all the issues around minimum tax. Thank you so much, Kwame. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Elias Wahisi. Ladies and gentlemen, we've had 4 presentations. Elias has concluded by talking to us about presenting the views of ISPAC on taxes. And one of the things that he proposes, which I think is long overdue, is a question about Kenya having a tax policy, a written tax policy, basically, which is a formal tax policy against which then we can check the objectives of every tax measure. Because it looks like in the last, say, 10 years or so, the overriding tax policy in Kenya is to increase revenue collection. And my view is that that is not that's not an appropriate tax policy, to be honest, because I think economic activity varies by as much as is possible. I mean, varies quite a bit, and to simply say that we should maximize collections is not good. Is not a welfare enhancing approach to what revenues and tax policy should do. You then spoke about excise duty, and the annual adjustments. The reason I picked this up is we at the IEA completely have a different view. And our view is that the Constitution of Kenya, under Chapter 12, provides to Parliament, I think it's Article 212, but it's an, or 222, I'll correct that. But one of the things that it does, it provides that the only authority that can raise taxes in Kenya is Parliament. Not even the executive. Even when people say that the president has raised taxes, that often is not true. The president simply signs a bill that Parliament has agreed upon, even if proposals might be made to Parliament. So we must situate responsibility for tax rises and tax reductions with Parliament, where it resides constitutionally with Parliament. We at the Institute of Economic Affairs have been studying excise tax duty because excise taxes, from the philosophy of economics, is usually a tax rate that allows for dealing with what we call externalities and activities that government wishes to reduce. Our view is that in the recent past, again, this has been a tax often proposed by Treasury at the behest of the KRA or both of them. And the intention is not necessarily to discourage any activity or to shift resources or consumption of any activity or manufacture of any activity. It is simply to maximize collections. And we wonder whether Parliament is the wiser for it or not. Coming down with that long story, what we believe is that the IEA, according to the Constitution, allowing the Commissioner of allowing the Commissioner of Excise Tax to vary, even if it's for the purposes of inflation, taxation, is actually taking the role of Parliament. We believe it is unconstitutional and somebody should challenge it. The references that go with, we know that the argument that is presented is that, look, excise taxes to keep excise taxes effective, then you need to have adjustments on inflation. And that is entirely within Parliament's control, and Parliament could actually do that in every financial year as it does. This kind of discretion that is given to the Commissioner of Excise Taxes. And we believe the KRA does a good job and they're entitled to it, but they do not have constitutional authority to set taxes and actually to vary by inflation rates. So we think this is not even a proposal that should be supported. That's a creep of state institutions, especially from the executive, into parliamentary domain. And it's a very, very dangerous creep. So we at the IEA think that this is discretion that should not be granted at all. You also mentioned the question of public debt. I think it's very, very clear that public debt is about to overwhelm tax collections. So obviously, today, public debt payments actually take 7 months of tax collection. Then the next of the 5 months is what is available for government to use, and that is topped up by other borrowing. So obviously, the public debt question is one that needs to be. I think the other question that you mentioned that is critical, again here, in my view, if there's fault, it's fault that must be left at the domain, in the doorsteps of Parliament. Parliament allowed not only the reversal of tax relief measures that were instituted because of the COVID-19 emergency, and they were justifiable, but actually used that opportunity to sneakily adjust the tax bands for income taxes. And I'm talking about personal income taxes, which is a pay-as-you-earn, and thereby effectively raise the tax rates. The bands were adjusted in such a way that it is not true. The argument that the Cabinet Secretary has presented is that the taxes were retained in the sense that they were taken back to where we were in April last year. The truth is, those taxes were raised because the bands were adjusted, and many more people fall under the marginal tax rates than they did last year for every income level. So obviously, that's a conversation that was not had, and in our view, it shows something about why budget policy in Kenya, fiscal policy in Kenya still is. Parliament, which is supposed to be the people's representatives, is not doing its best job or is not sufficiently alert. And therefore, these adjustments are either sneaked in, or Parliament gives us the view that they care for what the public thinks, but nevertheless, they just raise taxes as they can. As is allowed. So you also questioned the question about the minimal tax. I think that has been mentioned quite a number of times. It's going to be a difficult tax policy. A tax policy agreement is one in which Kenyans should actually have a bigger role, talking about what Kenya hopes to achieve and what should be the effects of each of the tax sets that we have. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a bit much later than we proposed to, but I'd like to open up this discussion now for questions to any one of our presenters. So let me hear your questions, or let me see if your hand is up. I'll call on you and you can ask a question. You also have the alternative of sending a message through the chat box, and I'll read it out so that any one of our guests, or rather the panelists, could answer it. Can I have any questions? Anyone with some feedback or questions to the panelists? Yes, Njuguna, could you ask the question? Oh, fine, you sent it here, but so it's the question from Njuguna is asking Dr. Njagi that Dr. Njagi mentioned significant investment is still required in extension services. In this regard, the Treasury's COVID-19 ERS mentions revision of the National Agriculture Extension Policy as a priority area. Is this policy captured in STGS, and if so, how can the process be fast-tracked now that it is cited in the ERS as a key area of focus. Thanks a lot, Juguna. I hope Dr. Njagi has taken that question. We'll go by 2 or 3 questions at a go. If there's any other question, please let's have it. Can I have another question? Okay, it seems there's no question. So Dr. Njagi, please respond to this one.
Thank you, Kwame. Thank you, Juguna, for this question. I think what the ministry is doing right now is try to revise both the NASEP and the NAS, so the National Agricultural Research Policy, and then the extension policy system as well. But to revive extension, I think you appreciate that the function of provision of extension services lies with county governments. The challenge has been that one, county government lacks staff, and then they lack also the resources, given that the budget allocation by county governments have been very, very little, even when counties are trying to do that. So it's a pinch, is a drop in the ocean, looking at what is required and what is needed. So one of the thinking currently is that they can leverage on technology. There was an initiative by the government, by the national level, that is a ministry, to pilot the e-extension program. And also counties are also trying some initiatives. I think we have some counties like Kisumu and Nakuru, which are piloting the call centers. Nakuru is also trying the digital apps to try and get pension services or extension messages to farmers. What is required right now is a concise effort by the ministry to take the lead in terms of building the capacity of county governments to be able to effectively provide extension services to farmers. So basically that infrastructure that we allowed to be eroded at the onset of devolution must be restored. And then now we can actually see what works for what context. Remember, for example, the feedback that we are getting from the already ongoing pilots is that, for example, things like digital extensions tend to be favorable to young farmers. Of course, we know that the average age right now of the farmer is about 60 years. So if you're talking about the traditional farmer, we still need to find out which method works for them. So the suggestion right now is that we move away from the one size fits all to context specific and value chain led systems. So we'll be able to, for example, argue that what would coffee farmers prefer, what would maize farmers prefer, what would tea farmers prefer, and then we structure a system around that to be able to deliver extension services to them.
Okay, thanks, team.
Thanks, team. Kwame, just as a follow-up, can I ask just one other question as a follow-up to that one?
Okay, fine, go ahead.
So I mentioned in my question the Treasury's COVID-19 ERS. Do you know, or do you have any information on how that's going to sit alongside the BPS in terms of budget allocations for some of these interventions that they've identified in the ERS? Are these going to be looked at in conjunction with the BPS, or is that something that they're looking at separately?
Thank you, Njuguna. So currently, you realize that when you look at the BPS, it kind of follows what the ACGS structure is, in the sense that the current proposal for funding for the Big Four, although we are seeing significant allocation to the Big Four priorities, most of this is foreign finance. So most of this is coming through the large multi-government donor-funded programs that are being run by the ministry. But in the ERS, there's a huge role for county governments, but they are a bit silent on where the funding is going to come from. So we see that county governments are either likely to be involved in also trying to fundraise from development partners to see whether they can work together to be able to undertake some of the actions in the ERS, or the government can significantly allow or increase from currently. You see, it's almost like an average of $300 billion, that is, I mean, billion Kenyan shillings, that is allocated to county governments. So the one alternative is to increase that and then have an agreement with the counties that substantial allocation goes to what has been prioritized in the ERS. I think when you look at the sectors, there are around 5 key sectors that have been identified. Agriculture, health, water, I think it's rural infrastructure. I'm forgetting the 5th one. So they can actually agree to increase, maybe put.
Tim, we lost you for a while. Are you still there?
Yes, Kwame. Sorry about that.
Okay.
So, can I repeat?
Yes.
So, I mentioned that the current structure for funding the Big Four is going to be heavily relied on foreign funding, about to the tune of about 75%. So most of this is coming through the donor-funded programs that are being run through the ministry. So the ERS package seems to be in addition to what is currently going on. So it doesn't look like some of those programs, they're counting on some of those programs to use them as recovery interventions. So a big chunk of it is expected to be implemented by county governments, but the key question is where that money comes from. So one of the leeway is that the government should increase funding to county governments, preferably put conditions that bulk of that funding goes to the ERS initiatives. Alternatively, they can allow now county governments to engage with development partners to see whether they can get additional funding to support those programs.
Okay, thanks, Kwame. Thanks, Doctor.
Okay, thanks a lot. So there are 2 more questions. So I'll ask each of the gentlemen. Let me ask them together, and then we'll ask each of the gentlemen to answer, and then make their final comments. So the first question comes from Ron, and it says, is there a need to use tax measures such as import taxes to shield the domestic agriculture sector from cheap food imports? Tim and Job, you'd speak about that. And then Winnie Maru asks, the gross turnover tax is effective from the 1st of January 2021, yet it is not recognized in any Kenyan legislation. How does this work? So I think that is a question for Job as well, and for Elias. And Dennis Otieno, who is a guest, asks, to IEA, what is the impact of raising the public debt ceiling to 9 trillion shillings? I think Elias should ask about that, and then I'll wrap up. So let me reverse this by asking Elias, please answer your questions, then we'll go to Tim, and then Job will finish before we wrap up. So as you answer your questions, please make your final comments as well. Thank you. Let's start with Elias.
Thank you, Kwame, and thank you, Winnie, for the question on gross turnover tax. The gross turnover tax you are speaking to, basically, I think is the minimum tax discussion that we've been having, and our argument has been that taxes based on turnover are always retrogressive and have adverse effects on the economy. So we've been pushing for a change, in fact, from the use of gross turnover to earnings before interest or tax, so that then can help even businesses. Definitely, when you look at the canons taxation, you need to tax, especially for corporates, profits. But what then this tax is trying to do is targeting incomes, and this coming at a point where if you have companies making losses, companies that have been making losses, that has been the cause of from discussion with KRA, the genesis of this minimum tax, that we have companies that have been perennially making losses or declaring loss-making status, and that has been the cause of that. So this is still a point of discussion. We're still lobbying together with other entities for better understanding and even abolition of that, or suspension of implementation. Of course, is now already effective to ensure that all these gray issues are captured, including what you've raised. The question by Dennis What's the impact of raising the public debt ceiling to 9 trillion? Yes, Dennis, even for my presentation, the discussion is the more debt we get ourselves into, the dire the situation in terms of service delivery to us, in terms of more resources that are required to pay debt service. And that means that we have then to shrink the basket that goes to development expenditure. So that is really a big challenge, and we need to have a national conversation in this matter of public debt, just to look at where we are going because of the continued increase. Remember, at some point, before last year, I think before 2019, we're using debt to GDP ratio as a measure of in terms of debt sustainability. But as a country, we've chosen to go to the absolute figure. We are now using, we were at 6 trillion, 7 trillion. We are now raising to 9 trillion, and who knows, we might go even to 12 to 20. So this could become unsustainable if we continue this trajectory. So the impact could be huge, depending on how then other macroeconomic variables also pan out. Thank you.
Thanks. So let's go now next to George. George, your final comments, please, before we go to Timothy and then John. George, are you there?
Yes, I'm there. Thank you very much, Kwame. I just want to wrap up by emphasizing the fact that WASH has a multiplier effect, and it's really value for money. The reason why I would request an exponential increase in budgetary allocation is because this can be done better with locally raised funds. Think of the businesses that are closed right now due to wash-related issues. Some of them are closed just because they lack a hand-washing facility. Why? Because the water supply system is problematic, and by extension, the water management system that supplies the water and the sanitation facilities. So my appeal now to Parliament as we go forward with this is to think of the institutional strengthening in terms of wash management. Think of the schools as centers for water, and strengthening the wash sector, where even communities can be supported. Think of the water tracking that is happening right now. If that was more centralized in institutions rather than taking water around in trucks, it will be more cost effective, and in the long run, it will pay off. So as we allocate this budget, let's look at the multiplier effect from WASH. We have 100,000 COVID cases, 83,000 have recovered, the 17,000 are still surviving. Good enough. But what will happen going forward? We need to make this more sustainable, and that is the only way we can do it is backing it up with the kind of funding that is required to ensure that we stay on course. And thank you all so much for this opportunity.
Okay, thanks a lot, George. I see there's a question from David Ruto. David, please ask your question and make it short before we go to to the two remaining panelists. David? David Ruto, please ask your question. I see your hand up.
Hello?
David, please keep your...
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, I've seen in the last presentation that there are some reflections on the possibility of referendum and the general elections. Is there any law that allows the government to undertake a financial obligation at the time when we have a lot of debts and it looks like the economy is really very bad? Is there a law that can be used maybe to demand that may not be happening, because the people are really suffering? We have seen the presentations that were made by all the presenters. They all show a very bad situation. Is there a law that can allow the citizens probably to try and force the government not to undertake such any more financial obligations when there is no money in the country?
Okay, thanks, David. So please switch off your camera now. And let's have the. I'll answer your question. I think it isn't a question directed to any of the panelists, but let's go down now to Tim, and then we'll finish your job. Tim, please answer your final comments, please.
Yeah. So thank you, Kwame. I'll start by answering the question by Ron. For Kenya, it would be against our interest to restrict policies, basically because, as I explained earlier, we are a net importer. And I can give an example. So right now, and probably for the next 2 weeks, we are likely to be facing high wheat prices because of what is happening in Europe, because our major import countries have decided to put some restrictions to import. So that means that the amount that is available in the international market is less. So the international price goes up. So that will be reflected, given that we are importing about 70% of our domestic consumption for wheat. We expect that has an impact on our, in the next 2 to 3 weeks, we'll see some effect on the local prices. So if you were to put measures that would, for example, restrict this by imposing taxes, this would be very good for farmers because now the local farmers are able to make more money. But for consumers, it means that you are likely to face higher prices for food. So given that the government has to balance this, the best way out of it is to try and see how we can make our wheat competitive, so that even if wheat comes and it is displacing our local production, our farmers can still make some money and remain in production. So in conclusion, I think, first of all, again, I'd like to thank IEA for extending this invitation to us. And just again to reiterate that for the sector, the key thing is to move towards transformation. So that means that we need to enhance our productivity, but as well as also the linkages with other sectors, like especially manufacturing, wholesale and retail. And for us to do this, I think policy, especially in the ag sector, has been a big letdown. Even without talking about the other taxes, the environment that the private sector requires for it to flourish in the sector is not there. And given the risks that are involved, agriculture is one of the sectors with very high risk. We continue to rely on weather. We have a lot of external shocks, whether it's pests or diseases or inadequate rainfall. We continue to struggle with this. It's also one of the sectors that is severely constrained in terms of access to credit. Therefore, we need a favorable environment where if private investors are willing to take risk, we should actually be encouraging them and not discouraging them. So all the public investments should be focusing on this to see how we can crowd in the private sector more by providing, I think the story has been consistent from all the presenters, more investment in public goods. This includes infrastructure, irrigation, research, to try and make sure that we minimize the risks that are in the sector, and we have a more predictable environment whereby somebody can easily try to predict with more or less with a high degree of accuracy, what the situation will be, and then that can inform the amount of risk or cost that they are willing to put down. So we must continue to lobby the government to do this and make sure that at the same time we also strengthen the government position, especially in balancing the competing interests, especially between producers and consumers. So thank you, Tom.
Okay, thanks, team. So Job, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Kwame, and everybody participating. Two questions, which I can generally also address a bit. As far as import taxation measures are concerned, they are quite critical to protect the industry, and even this is done when establishing, like now, free trade area, or when you're working coming up with a custom union. You feel like now in the EAC we have a custom union, or what we call the common external tariff, which is a tariff that is agreeable with WTO for goods that are originated within the region to be charged 0%, but that is the import duty. But those that are coming outside the region are charged 25% of their value. So import taxation measures, they are legit. They have been legitimized even at international trade laws. But when you find that this is not working, there is other measures that are taken, especially where you're finding that there is trade remedy issues that are arising. We're talking about dumping of goods from other countries, and dumping of goods is when the price at which you're buying imported goods is lower than the actual price that they're selling in the country of origin. When you talk about the safeguard measures, where you're feeling that your country sector is supposed to be safeguarded against other or similar sectors in other regions. If you're talking about agriculture sector, like now we have safeguard measures around sugar from Comesa region, and this is a safeguard measure that has been running for almost now 20 years. The other one is subsidies. You find there's some goods that are coming to the country and they are subsidized, heavily subsidized by their countries. So you're talking about even the agricultural products you're talking about. We know of countries in Europe that is still subsidizing unfairly their goods that are coming into Kenya. Another category also that would also call for import taxes measures is where a devaluation is taking place. And now where a devaluation is taking place and you're finding that ad valorem tax is not working, or the import duty, the one that we know of, percentage of value is not working, then a specific duty is imposed. That for this tonnage, we can only charge this much. So those are measures that are allowable time to time, and we are using them in manufacturing, where we are feeling there is unfair trade between us and the rest of the world. As far as minimum tax is concerned, there was a question about whether there is legislation upon which it lies. Yes, we have two. One of it is Finance Act 2020, and also Trade Laws. Sorry, no, it is Miscellaneous Amendment Act number 2 of 2020 on tax laws. So the two, they have mentioned the minimum tax. So it is already legislated and accepted to by the president. It's only that we have some reservations over some areas. If you're talking of loss-making companies have to pay this minimum tax. Startups which are trying to cover their investment or capital cost, they are supposed also to pay the minimum tax. So you find it is a disincentive for investment in the country. So it is legislated. It's only that we have very serious concerns with the minimum tax 1%. And it's good also to differentiate between turnover tax 1%, which is applicable to companies with a turnover of less than 50 million, and then the minimum tax 1%, which is applicable for companies that have a turnover of more than 50 million shillings. So it's good to have that difference. So the turnover tax, the one that is targeting the SMEs, micro, small, and medium enterprises, that is still running. It was reviewed during the pandemic as an incentive from 3% to 1% currently. So I was trying to create the difference between the two taxations. As a parting shot, the government should try very much to concentrate on the private sector and ensure that there is conducive business environment. Failure to do this, they are going to register reduction on the taxes that they are collecting. There was one wise gentleman called Ada Lafa, upon which we coined the word Ada Lafa curve. It indicates that the more you continue taxing the private sector, the more and increasingly you continue losing the revenues from the private sector because they feel overburdened and they cannot be able to move further. For the last 3 years, we have seen reduction of the corporation tax. That's why we have the minimum tax being introduced. We have seen the reduction on the excise duty that is collected, only because there is over taxation by the government from the private sector. is a discussion we're supposed to have from a national taxation policy, not the ad hoc introduction of taxation measures now and then that keep hurting one sector to the next. Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks a lot, everyone. Now, there's just one question that was asked by David Tuto. It's about referendum and general elections. I think we have two things to say about the referendum and general elections. If a referendum must be held or not, it has to be funded from the public taxes. I mean, from public funds, and public funds are controlled by the legislature. So if the members of parliament who are elected by Kenyans feel that the referendum does not serve a good purpose, then it's upon citizens to convince them so that they do not approve appropriations for the purposes of funding a referendum. I think that's how the laws are. So we cannot place this responsibility on say the president or somebody else by saying, look, you should know that the country is broke. Government business is managed through what the laws and the constitution say. So I think the place to direct our concern about whether the referendum is affordable or not would definitely be with Parliament, to ask them not to appropriate money if we think it isn't. As it is, you can tell it's something that requires more significant public participation and debate. So that's one. The second point is that the public debt question in Kenya should not become a crutch for everything that we are opposed to, any policy that we are opposed to. Because let's say, for instance, that the referendum, as variously estimated, will cost something between 4 billion shillings to to about 19-20 billion shillings. Government collection of taxes based on this present estimates is about 3.5 billion per day. So the referendum would be equivalent to 1 week of tax collection. So that's not cheap, but it certainly is not something that, even if we did not hold, would affect government's commitments in terms of debt servicing. So I think we need to know debt servicing obligations the government has are so huge that we shouldn't argue simple small things here and there. Cutting small taxes here and there would not necessarily be the, small expenditure here and there would not be what would solve it. The problem with public taxation in Kenya is actually a structural problem, in the sense that government has built huge tax deficits, a deficit of 8% of GDP, 8 to 9% of GDP every year carried forward for 9 years now, the entire Jubilee administration. 8% of GDP, not 8% of the taxes. It's unprecedented even in Kenya's history. Our thinking at the Institute of Economic Affairs is that a great reckoning will come, and there's not going to be a big crash. As you can already tell, there's some public sector workers working either in parastates or some arms of government who had not been paid in December, their December wages by the 15th of this month. And that already tells you the government is scrambling for revenues to be able to actually pay, or rather for space to be able to pay. So there's a structural problem that will not be solved by either failing to hold the referendum or failing to plant a few trees or build one road. It's a structural thing that actually needs a far greater discussion that maybe the IEA should lead with. So that's the question. Now, we're not saying that referendum should go on ahead or not. I think that's a question for citizens and for Parliament to intervene about. But just not holding the referendum, because I know people are talking a bit about the BBI. Saving 22 billion for the government of Kenya is not going to solve Kenya's tax problems at all. Let's bear that in mind. Now, as we come to the end of this discussion, I'd like to thank all our guests. Thank you very much, Dr. Tim Njagi, who always supports our work, Job, and the Kenya Association of Manufacturers as well. Thanks for the fantastic presentations. George Kabulunze, thank you very much for the partnership with us, and Elias Wahisi of the ISPAC. We'd like to thank you, and I hope that our guests, everybody sitting back there, can give you a clap. And I'd like to thank myself, my colleagues in our public finance management program who are responsible for planning this meeting today and for inviting these guests who've provided enlightening discussions for us to learn from. All these presentations, with the permission of Dr. Njagi, Job Wanjohi, George, and Elias, will be available at the IEA's website today. And obviously, what that means is that you can have access to them, but because you are registered for this meeting, our colleagues in our communications department will send you a link so that you can download them. I thank our communications team as well for making sure this facility is working, but we apologize for the small 1-2 minutes when we were away because of our a connection link that got cut, but we are back here. I think those are the things we have to manage as we have this meeting. So once again, thank you very much to our panelists and speakers, and I thank you all, the 48 of you who've been attending this, who stayed through this meeting. We went well past our scheduled time, but I'd like to thank you as well. And remind you that tomorrow at the same time from 9:30, we'll be holding the second day of these discussions dealing with the social sector, specifically health, tobacco taxation, public education funding, and of course youth and funding for budget policy for vulnerable groups. So I thank you and I hope you have a good morning. Thanks again for supporting the work of the Institute of Economic Affairs. Bye, everyone.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
you